Tension this morning, yes, dramatic. The inquiry lawyer, Hugo Keith KC, said that the UK had one of the highest rates of excess deaths in Europe. Yes, that's the direct quote. Shall we explore the data in reality?
Yes, so here, compiled by the excellent Oxford University publication Our World in Data, is the actual list.
Yes, the actual list shows the UK is not even near the top quartile of European countries for excess deaths over 2020 and 2021. It's hard to read, but we're in the lower half.
Indeed, the inquiry lawyer himself backtracked, instead confirming his comparison was actually about Western European countries.
I noticed that in your opening preamble a few months ago, you produced a slide saying that the UK was, I think, second only to Italy for excess deaths.
Correct.
That's not, to the best of my knowledge, the case. And I think that all I would say is that many other countries suffered terrible losses from COVID.
The evidence before Milady is that the United Kingdom had one of the highest rates of excess death in Europe. Almost all other Western European countries had a lower level of excess death.
I've seen.
Italy was tragically in a worse position than the United Kingdom.
Well, I don't wish to contradict you, Mr. Keith, but the evidence, the ONS data I saw put us, I think, about 16th or 19th in a table of 33.
In Western Europe, we were one of the worst off, if not the second worst off.
See what he did there? He changed his parameters from Europe to Western Europe. Perhaps next he'll change it even smaller. Were we the worst in the British Isles? But what's the truth? Here's the scrambled mess of excess death tolls across European countries. Now, it's impossible to see Britain amongst all of these lines because it's buried in the middle.
Yeah, there we are, in the middle of the pack. But Mr. Keith KC quickly insisted he was instead talking about only Western Europe.
Which is here on this graph. Now, it's probably quite easier to see where we are. We are, if we look at the next slide, right there in around the middle of the pack of Western Europe, not the highest.
So the only way you make the UK look as if it's anywhere near the top of the range is if you include the Scandinavian countries. Yes, including Sweden.
How very interesting. I'm not sure the COVID inquiry lawyer would want to make that comparison. Again, the UK not even the top country, not the second top, not the third top in that group of Western European countries. But it's interesting.
It does beg the question where Hugo Keith KC is getting his information from. Shall we speak to barrister and writer Stephen Barrett? Stephen, thank you very much for joining us on Good Afternoon Britain. Did you just saw those graphs that we showed to explain, firstly, what Hugo Keith claimed was true, that the UK had some of the highest excess deaths. What exactly was his claim again?
His claim was that amongst the highest in Europe. He then backtracked and said amongst the highest in Western Europe. But I'm not sure that's even an uncontested statement. Stephen Barrett, should the inquiry lawyer be proffering his own evidence like this?
No. And I wasn't intending to watch any of this inquiry. I stumbled on it quite by accident just because I was sat here doing something else that wasn't taking my full attention. And I found myself getting irritated with the KC, which is odd, because I don't have a political position on COVID or lockdowns or not locking down or anything like that. And I'm just simply neutral. So I asked myself, what is going on? And it's just how he is questioning is not neutral. It is not what you would expect of a scrupulously neutral inquiry or barrister. And with that event, he's absolutely caught out red-handed there. And he keeps doing a trick which is very irritating and also very wrong. Every time he says there is evidence before Milady, well, Milady hasn't reached any conclusions on the evidence because the inquiry hasn't finished, which means none of that has any extra validity. So why is he getting to pick and choose which of the bits of evidence that are before her are compelling? And the only reason I can think of is that the end point is predetermined. And it's looking incredibly like they have already decided that we didn't go into lockdown soon enough, that the government was confused, and they are simply pursuing that outcome, and questions are being asked to elicit answers. I think he got some out of Boris after a couple of hours, and no doubt those will be the bits that actually go into the report. I suspect we could write this report now. And given I am neutral on all of this, the only point I can make is that, well, it would save an awful lot of money if we wrote Baroness Hallett's report now, because she's not behaving like a judge. If I tried to ask questions like this, if I tried to ask 2 questions at once to a witness, you can't do that. If I ask a witness a question and then I shut them off, no, you can't do that. If a witness starts replying and then I add in additional words, which I saw him do with the word system failure, no, I'd get told off, you can't do that. She is not controlling this inquiry in the way that I would expect a judge to control this inquiry. Mr. Keith appears to have a predetermined outcome and to be pursuing it rigorously, and she is doing nothing to prevent that. It does feel it could be written now.
I've seen a number of days of this inquiry now where they bring out extra lawyers, people representing, for example, the Bereaved Families for Justice group, a group that doesn't look like it's looking for answers in terms of what to do next time if there's a pandemic, but is looking for retribution. Justice, as they would put it, to try and find a villain in this whole story, as long as that villain isn't the Chinese Communist Party. But if we're looking precisely at what is going on here, the Hugo Keith KC sort of started his piece by saying, look how bad Britain is. Look how awfully we have done, trying to find evidence to match his conclusion, ignoring the fact that, according to the data that I've been looking at this morning from Our World in Data, a very respected institution, Italy, Portugal, Spain, many other Western European countries have higher accumulated death tolls. What does it tell you that the COVID inquiry lawyer is starting from this position, starting to say that Britain is oh so bad?
Yes, and I felt quite bad doing it. I tweeted that this was quasi-religious, because I think it is quasi-religious. And then I felt slightly better because I got a WhatsApp from a fellow barrister who is no fan of Boris Johnson, who was absolutely outraged at the total lack of independence and objectivity that appears to be happening. He also appears to have decided that the COVID mortality rate is 2%, and that's absolutely true, fixed in stone. I don't think that is fixed in stone. In fact, I went to have a look at it, and there's a rather large and exciting report you can read on the mortality rate. It's just not as clear as he thinks it is, but it does seem as though we're being fed, spoon-fed, predetermined outcomes, predetermined opinions, as gospel truth, as a new religious truth, and along with it, we've got this focus on feeling. And there is this massive focus on feelings. That feels totally alien to me. There are no feelings in a courtroom when I'm in it. We deal with facts and we deal with law and we analyse what's going on. I don't understand why feelings have become the priority of this, what feels like predetermined inquiry.
Absolutely. Stephen, if you're right, and there is a predetermined outcome or there are predetermined conclusions to this inquiry, what does that tell us about the state of our democracy and the state of these kind of processes that we're seeing? We're expecting this to cost millions in taxpayer money, for example. Would you say that the COVID inquiry isn't worth it, isn't fulfilling what it should be doing, is a waste of time and resources?
I think it's going too far if I take a position on the inquiry. I think my role generally is just to highlight what's going on and to speak truth. I seem to cause perfectly enough offence just by being honest. So I don't need to start giving my own opinions and causing extra offence. It is certainly an awful lot of money to spend on something which has every feeling of a predetermined outcome. It's an awful lot of money to be spent on feelings, and it is a large investment of our time and resources. How are we as a society? What are we doing? Because, a democracy is very simple. Everybody is equal and democratic votes matter and are respected and they're taken seriously, and you don't belittle your political opponent. But there are other types of human society where there are elites and they use emotion and show trials and bread and circuses to control the masses, and they indulge people, and that's a different type of society. Which one are we? Because I always thought we were the first kind. And this is really exposing. This just feels like the kangaroo court all over again. certain people have a vendetta against Boris Johnson, and they're willing to use any means to pursue a vendetta against him. Now, other than probably the only point I can make about that is that that's quite dull, because we have done that one. And it may well be that the reason this inquiry is not getting as much attention is because we have done all that.
Obviously, they would say that they are performing, a public service. This is really to try to improve the way our government will approach the next pandemic. But we shall see what conclusions are drawn come the end of this very lengthy inquiry.
Yes, I hope they stop talking about gender balance and swearing. But there we are. Stephen Barrett, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to talk to you, and really, really interesting insight there in terms of how